If you're applying to business school this year, then you're probably aware that the GMAT has undergone its biggest change in 20 years or so.
Easily, since it went adaptive.
Yeah, and so it's tough to navigate these changes, and we're very lucky to have with us my old friend, my friend of almost 20 years, Stacey Koprince, who is Director of Content at Manhattan Prep, powered by Kaplan. And we have a ton of questions for you. You ready to answer them?
I'm excited. Let's do it.
I'm, of course, Jeremy Shinewald, founder and president of mbaMission, and we're the admissions experts, but we are lucky to have the test prep experts with us to answer these questions. So, first of all, just on a macro level, like why did these test prep changes occur?
Really, the new version of the test, which is called the GMAT Focus, is much more tightly aligned to the kinds of skills that people are actually going to use in business school. So GMAC, the organization that makes the test, it's actually a nonprofit organization that's a consortium of business schools. So it's making what the business schools want to see. And there were certain things on the classic or old version of the exam that arguably already weren't relevant, but it just, in this day and age, were seriously not relevant for business school. Geometry comes to mind, grammar. Grammar, at least at the level that it was taught on the test.
Right.
You didn't really need to know things to that level in order to succeed in business or to succeed in business school. So they've removed some of those things, and they've elevated certain things that have become much more important over the previous 10 or 20 years. Data analytics is something that if you are going to business school or you're working in business in general, you're analyzing data all day long.
Right.
So that is now appropriately more important on the test.
So maybe we can dig in on some of those changes. Like, what are the major changes overall in terms of time and sections? And then what are the questions in terms of content?
So the other thing that they did, which I think is great for people who need to take these tests, is they've made the test shorter. So it used to be almost 3.5 hours long, and it's actually now only 2 hours and 15 minutes, which is fantastic. So much easier to take now. There's still a lot to learn. It's not easy to go to business school, and it's not easy to take a test that will get you into business school, but the test itself is shorter, so you have less mental energy that needs to go into doing well for that 2 hours and 15 minutes. They have removed one entire section, which is the essay section. You don't have to write an essay on the test. You're writing a bunch of essays for your applications anyway,
right.
So that's not necessary any longer. There are still 3 sections on the exam. Those sections, so the quant section is pretty similar to what it used to be, except they moved some question types around. So the quant section just consists now of a single question type problem solving. It's basically math questions. It's any multiple choice math test you've ever taken in your life. That's what the quant section looks like. On the verbal section, they stripped out the grammar stuff, so that sentence correction question type is completely gone. You do still have the reading and argument stuff. So you're looking at arguments and analyzing them, or reading a passage and answering questions about them. And again, all of that very relevant to business school. And then the biggest change really is the what's called now the data insights section. So they've renamed the section from what it used to be called. That data insights section used to be essentially a separate section on the test where the score was not a part of your total GMAT score. And now they've actually pulled that section into the total score. So your score on the test, that the score that everybody cares about, which is your overall score for the test, equally includes all 3 of these sections: the quant, the verbal, and the data insights, which is the data analytics section. The 3 sections are weighted equally in your score. But that's a much better reflection, both the content that's tested and the fact that data analytics is actually part of your final score. Mm-hmm. It's a much better reflection of what skills the schools want to see or want to know that you have, so that they can feel confident that you're ready to start business school.
Do you think any of the changes were driven by a sense of competition with the GRE and the GRE's changes?
I'm sure that the shortening of the test was part of that, although GMAC did announce that they were shortening the GMAT before ETS announced that they were shortening the GRE, but there's definitely competition between these 2 groups. From the business school's perspective, they don't necessarily care exactly how long the test is. They just want to have the data to know if someone's ready for business school. But from the candidate's perspective, since they have the choice of taking either exam, then yes, a shorter exam is obviously going to be more attractive to somebody taking the test.
Right. Is there any, an expert who's taught probably tens of thousands of students at this point, is there any, aside from obviously there being some full categories of questions being absent now, but is there any difference in the way one would prepare?
So that's an interesting question. So yes, obviously the content has changed, so that just shifts what you're studying and how much time and effort you're applying to those different things. The other big change that the GMAT introduced, so first of all, they literally invented a new type of algorithm for this test. They got a patent for it. They filed for a patent or were granted a patent. So it's still an adaptive test. It's still what's called a question adaptive test, but they've invented a new way to do it that allowed them to do two things. It allowed them to shorten the exam significantly without sacrificing what's called validity, which is essentially how good the exam is at predicting how well someone will do in business school. On the old GMAT, this was the classic thing that everybody hated. You had to answer the questions, you had to answer them in order, and you couldn't go back to any questions that you had already answered, and that's super stressful. So on the new exam with this new algorithm that they've invented, it's crazy that they figured this out how to do this. You take a section of the test for the first time, you still do have to answer the questions and answer them in order. But at the end of the section, you can actually go back and look at all your questions again and then change up to 3 answers.
Right.
Which is like not how adaptive tests work. The GRE allows you to do this within a section. It's a different kind of adaptive test. The type of algorithm that the GMAT uses is like the gold standard in adaptive testing. But it had this restriction that meant you couldn't change answers. So they've actually figured out how to keep the gold standard question adaptive structure and yet allow you to change a small number of answers at the end of the section. You're still studying the same question types and the same content areas for the most part, except for the ones that were removed. It changes strategy. It changes how you work your way through, how you prepare yourself mentally,
right,
to be able to do that. And it also reduces a certain level of stress. When you're sitting in a question and you're like, okay, this is my only shot at it. Do I keep going? Do I let go? And if I let go, I have to let go forever. And that's super stressful. And now it can be, I took a practice test last weekend and hit a question and was like, oh my God, I don't know. I think I might know how to do this, but it's going to take me a while to figure it out. And I just bookmarked it and forgot about it and kept going with my section. So it didn't interrupt my section. I didn't waste a bunch of time and energy on that one question right in the middle of my section. And then by the time I got to the end of the section and I had a few minutes left, I was like, okay, now I can go look at the thing and see if I can figure it out. So it really changes both the strategy as you're taking it and just that anxiety level.
So new change, there's a new scale. How's the scoring going to be different?
There is a new scoring scale for both the total score and for the individual sections on the test. The old score was 200 to 800, and that was the big score, the total score that if anyone said, how'd you do on the GMAT, that's the score that they meant. The new scale is 205 to 805. And as soon as anyone hears that, they immediately think, okay, so like a 700 on the old scale is a 705 on the new scale. And that would be logical. It's not what's actually happening. So they've not only changed the numbers by changing it to 205 to 805, but they've essentially, I'm going to call it recentered, if you remember from SAT a million years ago. So they basically picked up the scale and they like shifted it. It's like they just picked up the scale and moved it over. And so, for example, on the old scale, a 700 score was what a lot of people were looking for. They wanted to break a 700 or have a 7XX kind of score. So on the new scale, that equivalent score for a 700 is around a 655. So that will take a little bit of getting used to, just because we're so used to for years talking about scores that started with 700. But that's also because they wanted to shift the scale in this way. That's also why they changed the numbers, so you can tell at the end, if it ends in a 5, you know it's the new scale, and so you have to think about the new scale, versus if it ends in a 0, it's the old scale. So they did that both to help all of us working with it and for the admissions officers to be able to know at a glance, are they looking at a classic GMAT score, or are they looking at a GMAT Focus score? And then you know the scale that you're dealing with and can process it accordingly.
You talked about the difference in test scores, and I've been reading some chatter online about how applicants are anxious about the fact that, a school might confuse, an old score with a new score, how they might not be, instinctively calibrated the same way. What do you say to that student?
I've seen some of those same posts online. So people essentially are worried that because on the new scale, a 655, like that number is a lower number, right? It's just literally a lower number than 700 on the old scale, that admissions officers will be confused about that. We'll be looking at two different applicants and think that the person who scored 700 on the old test has done better than the person who scored 655 on the new test. I have zero concern about an admissions officer. Like, it's literally their job. It's literally like, if I'm an admissions officer, I'm going to have two things sitting in front of me. One's going to be the old scale, one's going to be the new scale. I'm going to identify which test it is, and I'm just going to look up what I need. I probably won't even need to look it up. I'll know for my school that my school wants this on the old test or wants this on the new test.
Right.
The admissions officers are comparing GPAs from people who went to different schools or got different degrees. Like, that's way more complicated than just two scales for two different versions of the test.
Right.
It's a pretty easy comparison.
Right. What would you say to someone who says, should I just take the GRE for now until I sort of learn, better the devil I know, so to speak?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So in the sense of, like, should I take the GMAT or GRE, I don't think there's a reason to change that decision because we've changed from the classic GMAT to the GMAT Focus. Like, there's not a reason to say, oh, I should wait till the dust settles on that. The GMAT Focus is a fully fledged new test. It's out, they've tested it, it's good, it's launched. If that's the best test for you, take that test. The thing that I would say, and that I've been counseling my own students, the students who are coming to Manhattan Prep, is it was always the case that the GMAT was the standard. And so you're going to take the GMAT unless you're worried that you can't get the score, or you think it will take you a lot longer to get the score, and so then you might go to the GRE. Or you're doing something like also applying to another program, a non-business school program that requires the GRE, and so you need the GRE. Now, I would say it's even more like you should lean towards the GMAT versus the GRE, because you don't have to study grammar, but for the GRE, you still have to study vocabulary. Grammar or vocab, both of those, there's a huge amount of time to memorize a bunch of rules or definitions, and it's just gone now completely. On the math side, you don't have to study geometry. And again, there's a huge number of formulas and rules that you have to memorize for geometry that still exists on the GRE. You don't have to do it on the GMAT. So there are a couple of significant things removed from the GMAT Focus that you would still have to spend time studying for the GRE. So that's one significant benefit in my opinion. The other thing is it's true that the GMAT now places a heavier emphasis on data analysis, data analytics. Some of that is also on the GRE, so it existed on both the old version, the GMAT, and the GRE. There's more of it, and it's more heavily emphasized in your score on the GMAT. And so some people that I've been talking to have been nervous about that and have been like, oh, that might be a reason to go to the GRE. And possibly yes, but I'm going to challenge your thinking on that, or their thinking on that. You want to go to business school. You're going to be analyzing data every single day in business school. And in fact, for the rest of your career, if you want that kind of business type job, you're going to be analyzing data every day. So if you are in any way nervous about the data analysis side of things for the GMAT or the GRE, tackle that right now. Get a good solid grounding in it right now, so that when you get to business school on day one, you already feel more comfortable with data analysis, rather than having your first term be like, what am I doing with all of this stuff? That's going to impact your grade. Like, do it before business school starts. You're paying too much money to risk that.
So what about those who've taken the old GMAT and now, soon enough it's not available, and they're taking the new one? If you've taken it twice, can you only take it 3 times on the new one?
Yeah.
Do you get a fresh slate? Because you can only take the GMAT,
for
those who don't know, you can only take it 5 times.
8 times in your life and 5 times in a calendar year. So first of all, for the restrictions apply for the old test and for the new test combined. So for example, if you've already taken the classic GMAT twice earlier this year, as long as you're still within that 12-month window, you can take the Focus 3 more times. So they will add the numbers up. And you do have 8 times lifetime across both versions of the exam combined. And then the other thing I just wanted to say too is if you've already taken the old GMAT and you like your score and you're good, you're done. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about there being any kind of like a bad comparison that people will want the new GMAT. The schools are accepting both exams. It's fine. You're good. The new GMAT is like a subset of the old GMAT. So you don't have to worry that there are a bunch of new things you're going to need to study because the test has changed. Everything that you've studied is still there. Some things will drop out and you don't have to worry about them anymore. What you are going to need to learn is the new time management, because the sections are shorter and there are fewer questions in each section. And you're going to need to learn how to handle the being able to change your answers. And how does that impact the way that you make decisions as you answer the questions in each section. On your old GMAT, you might not have cared about or studied as much the data analysis stuff since that wasn't part of the total score. So yes, you'll have to do some study there to pick up your skills on the data analysis section, but you've already learned all of the stuff. You just need to practice it some more.
So let's be a little definitive here. The GRE versus the GMAT, I'll give you the admissions perspective.
Please.
The admissions perspective, every admissions officer will tell you that there is no preference, that the two are treated entirely equally. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that's going to change with a new test. So from an admissions perspective, they are totally agnostic. You can take whichever test you want. Does one of these tests favor a certain kind of thinker, a certain kind of problem solver relative to another?
So the new test now has all three sections as part of your total score. The quant section, the verbal section. The data insight section is a mix of quant and verbal skills, but that section is weighted a bit more heavily towards quant skills. I would say that section is maybe 60% quant to 40% verbal skills. So if you put all that together, there is a little bit more of a weighting towards quant skills versus verbal skills now overall in terms of what factors into your total score. There's a little bit more of a quant weighting, but that quant weighting is coming from data analysis, which isn't classic quant. It's not like math in school kind of quant.
Right.
It's real world analyzing graphs and tables and things that you're probably already doing at work. So in that sense, like, yes, the total score is weighted a little bit more towards quant heavier skills, but more of those skills are real world now.
So one group in particular that would probably be interested in whether the new test favors them would be, those who are not native English speakers. So maybe the change in grammar, the reduction in grammar favor the GMAT.
I'm certain that if I were to try to take a test in French, for example, I'd be happy if that test did not have grammar in it. It's much harder as, not my main language or not my native language. So yes, so that's a big help, I think, for people who actually, regardless of which language is your first language, if you're not a fan of grammar, it's good that that's gone from the test.
What about someone with a lot of test anxiety? There are all these bells and whistles now. The GMAT now you can
actually bookmark questions.
Bookmark questions. The GRE.
Yeah, I do still think so. Test anxiety is a great question. The GRE still has more flexibility, because when you're on any one section of the GRE, you can move around among those questions however you would like and answer them in any order that you would like. So it has more flexibility in that sense. And so for some people, that's better. I will say having that level of flexibility, some people actually find that more stressful, because then it's what order should I do this in? And how many questions should I skip now? And how much time do I need to save when I go back? So the limitation that's on the GMAT side, where you can only change 3 answers, it's less flexible, but that boundary could also help. I personally, I wouldn't want to be able to change any answer, because then I might panic, change a bunch of answers, and that would be bad. So it depends on the individual. I think some people are dealing, and lots of people are dealing with performance anxiety on these tests. Some people will find it more reassuring to be able to make whatever decisions they want to make, in which case the GRE is the way to go. And some people will say, okay, I want some flexibility, but I don't want to have all the flexibility.
Right.
I would like some boundaries on it. And so the GMAT is setting that, and then that one would be the way to go.
Okay. So shorter test, does that mean shorter prep time? Is my prep time changing at all?
I wish. Yeah. So both exams, both the shorter GMAT and the shorter GRE, they still have the same sections that they used to have and the same question types that they used to have. So for both exams, there's still a decent amount of prep involved. I would say on the GMAT side, there's a little bit less time than there used to be, because you don't have grammar and you don't have geometry or the essay. So I still do think for both of these exams, I still use the analogy that it's like taking a university level class. You have a semester's worth of class, and you're going to be, studying 5, 10 hours, probably closer to 10 hours each week for a period of a few months, and then you're going to take your final exam. That's what it feels like. So on the new test, the 3 sections are scored on a scale of 60 to 90. They have, in the same way that I was describing earlier, that they've sort of like recentered the total score, they've done something similar for the sections as well. As I'm sure you're familiar with, in the past 10, 15 years, for example, the quant scores on the old test, the percentiles got super skewed. 15 years ago on the old test, a score of 45 was like 80th percentile. Right. And now it's like 45th percentile. It's below 50th percentile. So, and that's just a function of the change in the people. It's a worldwide exam now, where 15 years ago it was much more commonly just used in North America, that sort of thing. So it's a reflection of the changing pool of people taking the exam. So they're clearly trying to adjust that now as they're doing the new scoring scale so that the percentiles aren't so skewed.
Right.
So it's not entirely clear yet, for example, what the new 45 on quant will be.
Right.
But I also wouldn't worry so much about that because now you've got 3 sections that are going into the total score, not just 2 sections. So like that fundamental score, the way that they calculate that score has just changed. So you're still looking in general to show, a decent score on each section, that you don't have 1 or 2 sections that are perfect and then the third section's really low, that kind of thing. You're looking for pretty balanced scores across all 3.
Right. Okay, let's talk about the GRE versus the GMAT. Which one do you think the admissions officers are going to prefer?
I think the status quo will continue, which is that the schools accept both exams equally. So I don't think that will change.
Yeah, I mean, everything the admissions officers have told me for 15 years since they started taking the GRE is that they're totally agnostic and they accept them both equally.
So it's really, I think, up to you, the candidate, which test you think is better for you. What I have been telling people since the Focus came out is that I would start by taking a look at the GMAT Focus, simply because there's no grammar. You still have to do vocab for the GRE. There's no geometry. You still have to study geometry for the GRE. There's no essay. You still have to learn how to do the essay for the GRE. So there's just objectively fewer things. The grammar versus vocab one is the big one. There's so much time to study those things. So there's just objectively fewer things. Other than that, the content is pretty similar across the 2 exams. You're learning the same math skills. You're learning the same verbal reasoning skills. So start with the Focus, see if that works for you. If it doesn't, for whatever reason, then you can switch over to the GRE. The things you'll be learning at heart are still very similar on both exams, so you're not wasting your time by choosing one to start with and then later switching to the other one.
I hate to subject you to punditry here, but what do you think happens to the EA?
That is an excellent question. Okay, so the executive assessment is an exam also made by the same makers of the GMAT. It was specifically designed originally for people applying to executive MBA programs, but it has expanded in the past few years, where a lot of primarily part-time and weekend programs, but even some full-time programs also now accept the EA. It was a much shorter version of the GMAT. It's only an hour and a half long. It does not include an essay, so it just has the other 3 sections, verbal quant and the data analytics. It's called integrated reasoning, the old name from the old test. Now that they've shortened the Focus, the Focus is 2 hours and 15 minutes. The EA is an hour and a half. So there's no real difference there. And the other super interesting thing to me is they've gotten rid of sentence correction on the GMAT, but the EA still has sentence correction. And there's really no reason why someone going to an executive MBA program needs to know grammar any more than somebody who's going to a regular full-time MBA program. So I will be super curious to see what they do. My immediate bet would be you don't keep the EA with sentence correction. Why would you keep sentence correction?
The business person to me says, why, if you're GMAC, why support 2 different
tests that are
tests that are so similar and requires you to make inroads with one? There may be some argument for market share of having 2 products out there, but also my admissions brain says it's possible that the admissions offices will want the EA there as a workaround, because they always had the GRE as a workaround for a long time. So if you were struggling with the GMAT, they were like, well, maybe take the GRE because the GRE scores are kind of lower. They're coming up, and I think we're reaching close to parity.
We're beyond that, So the GRE can no longer be the workaround.
Could be the workaround. So maybe the admissions officers are going to say, keep the EA around. But then they could also move towards test optional situations if they wanted as well.
Which they do already, and they use test waivers and that sort of thing.
Test waivers are becoming more common.
For specific applicants. So I don't know what their financials are, but I have to imagine that this is something they're taking a hard look at, and I wouldn't be surprised if in 6 months or a year we find out that the EA is just gonna go away. I wouldn't be surprised by that. I think the admissions officers, I think you're right that the admissions officers would like to have it, but if and again I have no idea, if the testing org is losing money on this test, they're not going to keep it just because the admissions officers want it. I don't know if that's the case. Right.
The GMAT has changed. The GRE has changed. Let's also talk about the GRE's changes. What were the changes with the GRE?
So the GRE changes were a lot simpler, essentially, than the GMAT changes. The test structure is still largely the same. It's just everything's shorter. So all of the sections have fewer questions and less time to answer, of course. But they still have all of the same sections except for they dropped one of the 2 essays. Okay. But other than that, the content is the same, the question types are the same, the sections are the same, it's just shorter.
So are there any changes in the way in which you'd prep for the GRE?
The only thing really is that they've dropped one of the 2 essays, so you don't have to prepare for that essay now. But other than that, all the question types and content areas are still there. So you still have to study that full breadth of content. What will change is when you take a practice exam, so the length of each section is shorter plus fewer questions. That's all.
So this has been so much fun to talk shop and to be back with my old friend, back in front of the videos with my old friend Stacey Koprince from Manhattan Prep. High five. Let's do it again sometime.
I would love to. Thanks for having me.